right, so you really outdone yourself this time with this deep dive. This is this YouTube video. It's wild. It's like someone just hit record on their phone, just word vomiting this whole story, And it's dark, like shadowy figures, whispers of betrayal. Almost feels like a season finale of some gritty crime show.
You're not wrong. It's raw, definitely unfiltered, but that's what makes it so intriguing. We see this all the time, especially with organized crime, right? This coded language, almost like they're speaking in riddles and everyone's maneuvering for control, for power. It's like a chess match played on a very shaky board.
Totally. And at the center of this whole thing, this guy, let's call him Darren for now, he claims he's been framed. And not just for one thing, but for everything. Weapons charges, drug conspiracies, you name it, he's supposedly being pinned for it. And the mastermind behind it all, according to Darren at least, is this Mcdonald character.
And here's where things get really interesting, wouldn't you say? Because Darren doesn't just accuse Elliot, oh no. He spins this elaborate tale about Elliot getting arrested multiple times, always with a different name, like a real slippery character. But then Elliot gets caught, and while he's in custody, surprise, surprise, he starts singing about Darren.
Hold on a minute. I know that's a little too convenient. So either Darren's the unluckiest guy on the planet, or, and this is more likely, there's something else going on, right? Is he trying to throw the scent off, discredit a witness? It's all very suspicious.
It's the age-old question, isn't it? Separating truth from fiction. When everyone involved has skin in the game. And Darren, he's definitely aware of how things look, especially in this world he's describing. He keeps coming back to this idea of a code, this unspoken set of rules that dictate everything. Loyalty, behavior, who you trust, who you absolutely don't trust.
And at the tippy top of that list, with flashing neon lights around it, is snitching. Like, you do not rat, no matter what.
Exactly. And it's fascinating how this code of silence, we've seen it throughout history, right? Different cultures, different groups. It often comes down to a lack of faith in the system, in this case, the justice system. For people like Darren, the police aren't seen as protectors, they're the enemy, or at the very least, a threat. So they make their own rules, their own ways of keeping things in line.
So you're saying, in this world, going to the cops, even if you're the victim, that's a one-way ticket to being completely ostracized. You're labeled untrustworthy and might even find yourself in more danger than if you'd kept your mouth shut.
Absolutely. And that's where the concept of street justice comes into play. It's a complex issue. Often it arises in communities where trust in law enforcement is, well, let's just say it's minimal. People feel a stronger loyalty to their own group, to their own moral code, even if it means taking matters into their own hands. And look, I'm not saying it's right, not at all. But to understand these situations, we have to understand the factors driving them.
Okay, so we've got Darren claiming he's been set up, using this code of silence as a shield. But there's another layer to this, right? This guy, John Murphy, who Darren seems to have a history with, a rivalry, it seems like.
Oh, yes, John Murphy. Now, this is where the narrative takes an interesting turn, because now we're getting hints about motives, power struggles. It goes beyond just Darren and Elliot. According to Darren, Elliot was playing both sides, working with John Murphy and someone named Dennis Green, all while building a case against Darren with the police. I mean, if this is true, Elliot's playing 3D chess while everyone else is using checkers.
That's cold. So not just some small-time crook who got caught. This Elliot, he might be a major player in all of this.
It's definitely possible, and this is what makes this whole thing so fascinating from a, criminology standpoint. If, and that's a big if, but if what Darren's saying is true, then Elliot, he understands the rules of the game, the consequences, the stakes. He's playing on hard mode, and in that game, loyalty can shift like the wind, and betrayal, well, that can have deadly consequences.
This is like spy thriller levels of intrigue. But we haven't even gotten to the good stuff yet, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the crimes Darren's being accused of, those are serious. We're talking weapons charges, drug distribution. This isn't some petty theft ring.
You're absolutely right. And that just adds another layer of complexity to this whole thing. Now we have to consider, is it possible that these accusations against Darren, are they legitimate? Maybe Elliot, whether it was to save himself or to climb the ladder, maybe his testimony is what brought all of this to light.
So now we're talking about a whole other level. What if Darren's not the innocent victim he's trying to be? Maybe this whole code of silence argument is just a clever distraction from his own activities.
And that's the thing, right? Trying to untangle the truth, the motives, who's manipulating who. It's like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces keep changing shape right in front of you. But that doesn't mean we give up, because somewhere in this mess, in these half-truths and accusations, there's a story to uncover.
It's like we've stumbled onto a set of a really good movie, but we're missing the script, so we have to figure it out as we go.
Exactly. And that's what makes these deep dives so compelling, that pursuit of understanding. It's like, well, it's like putting together a jigsaw puzzle, except the picture keeps changing. But that just makes it more intriguing.
It's like we've walked into this high-stakes game, right? But we can only see, like, the edges of the cards, a few of the chips. We're missing so much context.
Oh, that's a perfect way to put it. And it's what makes these cases so hard to crack. We're stuck with these unreliable narrators, each one with their own agenda, their own spin. It's like a funhouse mirror situation. Even the simplest facts get warped.
And Darren, he's really pushing this whole us versus them narrative, right? He keeps saying that life, like it's this separate universe with its own laws, its own rules.
Absolutely. And that's important, right? This feeling of being separate, of living by a different code. It's not just, something you see in criminal groups. Throughout history, look at any marginalized group. Often they develop their own codes of conduct. It's a response, a way to regain some sense of power when the systems failed them.
So you're saying these codes, even when they involve, well, illegal activity, they're about creating order, some semblance of control in a world that feels chaotic.
Exactly. They provide a framework, right? A way to navigate these complex relationships, to figure out who to trust, how to enforce loyalty. And within that framework, snitching. That's the ultimate betrayal. It's not just about keeping quiet. It's about upholding the foundation of this whole system they've built.
Which brings us back to Elliot McDonald. Is he this cunning strategist that Darren's making him out to be? Someone who was playing both sides for his own benefit? Or is he more of a small-time player who got in too deep and saw cooperating as his only way out?
It's really impossible to say for sure with what we've got, but one thing that stands out is Darren's claim that Elliot was grafting, basically working with both John Murphy and Dennis Green. That says something, that level of maneuvering, understanding how to work within that criminal world.
So not just some low-level guy who flipped. Elliot might be a pretty important piece of this puzzle.
It's possible, definitely possible. And that's where this gets really interesting from a criminological perspective. If, and again, it's a big if, but if Darren's telling even part of the truth, then Elliot, he understands the power dynamics, the rules, the risks. He's playing a very, very dangerous game.
Yeah. Talk about high stakes. And speaking of high stakes, we haven't even gotten into the specifics of these crimes. We're talking serious weapons charges, drug distribution. This isn't exactly jaywalking.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's serious stuff. And that adds another layer of complexity here, because now we have to consider, what if these accusations against Darren, what if they're legitimate? What if Elliot's testimony may be motivated by self-preservation, maybe ambition? What if it's what brought these charges to the surface?
Okay, now my mind's going in a whole different direction. Maybe Darren isn't the victim here after all. Maybe this code of silence thing, it's all a cover to deflect from his own criminal activity.
That's the challenge with cases like this, isn't it? Unraveling the why, figuring out who's playing who, and ultimately trying to find the truth under all of these layers of, well, everything. Deception, survival instincts. It's messy.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle, but the pieces keep changing every time you look away. But we don't just give up, right? Somewhere in all of this, there's a story waiting to be untangled.
Exactly. And that pursuit of understanding, of making sense of these fragments of information, that's what makes this deep dive so compelling.
We're like those detectives in old movies, hunched over a blurry photograph trying to make sense of it all.
It's just like those old films. The more you look, the more you realize everyone's hiding something, everyone's playing a role.
And the masks they're wearing, it's all about this code, this fear of talking, of the consequences if you break the rules.
Right, and that creates this weird paradox, doesn't it? The code is supposed to protect, to keep things in line, but it can also trap people, lock them into this cycle of silence and violence. It's
a tough one. So let's say someone like Darren, he wants out, wants to leave that life behind. How do you even start? Wouldn't that put them in even more danger? I mean, wouldn't they be risking everything?
It's a huge dilemma, and honestly, there are no easy answers. There's a reason why it's so hard for people to leave that world behind, to come back to, regular life. The stigma of having a record, the lack of support, and in cases like this, the threat of revenge from former, shall we say, associates, it creates these huge barriers.
It's like they can't escape their own past, can they? Even if they get away from the physical environment, the rules, that way of thinking, it stays with them.
It does. And this is where, our traditional law enforcement, it struggles. Just locking people up without dealing with the root causes, the social factors, the psychological aspects. It doesn't really solve the problem long term.
So what do we do? How do we break the cycle? Is it even possible to bridge the gap between this world of street justice and the actual legal system?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And there's no, like, magic solution. But I think it has to start with understanding, right? Understanding why people get involved in this life, the pressures they face, this whole web of factors that leads them down these paths. And it takes a willingness to work with these communities to build some trust, to offer them alternatives to the violence and the retribution.
Sounds like a long road and honestly kind of a bleak outlook, especially since we still don't know the full story with Darren and Elliot. And don't forget John Murphy, he's still out there somewhere.
True, the details of this case, they might stay a mystery. But we've gotten a glimpse into a world that most people don't see. A world where loyalty can be broken in an instant, where silence is everything, and where the line between justice and revenge, well, it gets very blurry.
It's a lot to think about, that's for sure. As we wrap up this deep dive, I just keep coming back to these unanswered questions. Did someone play Darren? Is he a victim, or is he the one pulling the strings? I guess we'll never really know.
And maybe that's the point. Maybe the biggest takeaway here is that in this world, in the world of crime and punishment, there aren't always clear answers, no perfect heroes or villains. It's mostly shades of gray. And it's in those gray areas where we don't have all the facts that we have to look at our own biases, wrestle with some uncomfortable truths, and admit sometimes we just don't understand. Who knows what the real story is? But it's definitely given us a lot to think about.
It has. And on that note, we'll leave you with this. Next time you hear a story, something that sounds almost too crazy to be true, remember Darren and Elliot and John Murphy. Remember that under every news story, every viral video, there's a whole other world at play, full of hidden motives and consequences that most of us will never really grasp.